No guts, no glory. That was the motto Brian Stevens lived by, but he never imagined just how literally it would apply as the reptilian aliens aimed their blasters at his intestines, debating whether to disintegrate him on the spot. Smoke still billowed from the wreckage of Brian's spacecraft, pursued and shot down by space pirates over the remote world of Gornax. He had barely stumbled out of the debris before finding himself surrounded by the planet's natives, a species of intimidating lizard men known as the Gorn. Energy weapons trained on him from all sides, Brian slowly raised his hands, wincing at the pain of what was certainly a broken rib or two. He tried to communicate that he meant no harm, but the Gorn just clicked their forked tongues impatiently, clawed fingers tightening on their triggers. Just as Brian was sure he was about to be blasted to bits, one of the Gorn barked an order. The others reluctantly lowered their weapons as the apparent leader stepped forward, his scales a mottled red and yellow. He introduced himself as Janus, and seemed intrigued rather than hostile. Through a series of grunts, gestures, and mangled attempts at each other's languages, Janus managed to convey that Brian had landed on Gornax during a sacred mating ritual. Once a decade, unmated Gorn males engaged in lethal combat and challenges to win breeding rights. No outsider had ever witnessed the ritual and lived. Brian's protests that he wanted no part in their barbaric tradition fell on deaf ears. Janus informed him that now that he had seen the ritual, he had only two options: participate and win, or die on the spot. Leaving was not a choice. As the gravity of the situation sank in, Brian's mind raced. He had explored uncharted space for years, but no encounter had prepared him for this. Janus revealed that the Gorn were an ancient warrior race facing extinction due to their brutal mating rituals. He himself was the ritual's defender, sworn to fight any challenger to the death. It became clear that Brian's only hope of seeing Earth again was to win this lethal alien mating competition against foes who trained for it their entire lives. Even if he could beat the other challengers, he'd still have to defeat Janus in ritual combat. Faced with death now or death later, Brian reluctantly agreed. The Gorn brought him to a crude encampment to await the bloody games. As he sat in a makeshift cage, bruised and light years from home, one thought consumed him: survive. Get home. Warn humanity about the deadly warrior race called the Gorn, no matter the cost. The makeshift cage the Gorn had shoved Brian into was little more than a hole in the ground with a crude metal grate laid over the top. It stank of rust, blood, and the musky odor of its previous occupants. Brian sat with his back against the earthen wall, trying to find a position that didn't aggravate his battered ribs. He surveyed the alien encampment through the gaps in the grate. It was a harsh, unforgiving place. A collection of rough shelters and Spartan training grounds sprawled across a barren, rocky plain. The Gorn males stalked among the structures, their heavy, muscular frames covered in thick, scaly hides that looked almost impervious to damage. Over the next few days, Brian was unceremoniously hauled from his cage and subjected to a brutal gauntlet of physical challenges, each designed to weed out the weak and unworthy. There were grueling endurance runs across the rugged, unforgiving terrain of Gornax, the burning in his lungs and the ache in his legs pushed to the limit. In the tests of strength, Brian strained against the weight of immense boulders, his muscles screaming as he fought to lift what the Gorn males handled with ease. And in a particularly gory trial, the contestants were armed with nothing but primitive spears and sent to hunt one of Gornax's notorious giant predators, monstrous saurian beasts with razor-filled maws and appetites to match. Brian barely survived, relying more on his wits and agility than brute strength. He used his smaller size to his advantage, dodging the beast's crushing jaws and finding chinks in its armored hide to sink his spear into. When the dust settled and the beast lay dead, Brian found himself the subject of appraising looks from some of the Gorn males. They seemed begrudgingly impressed by the tenacity of this strange, soft-skinned outsider. But not all were so accepting. Crocs, a hulking brute of a Gorn with a vicious temper, took an immediate disliking to Brian. He saw the human as an affront to sacred Gorn tradition and made no secret of his desire to see Brian dead. During a climbing challenge up a treacherous cliff face, Brian felt his handhold suddenly give way. He barely managed to catch himself, his heart pounding as he realized Crocs was just above him, a nasty gleam in his reptilian eyes. The Gorn had tried to sabotage him, hoping to see him dashed on the rocks below. As the challenges wore on, Brian found an unlikely friend in Janus, the ritual's defender. In the brief respites between trials, Janus would seek Brian out. At first, their interactions were awkward, limited by the language barrier, but gradually, through a mix of gestures, broken phrases, and a growing mutual respect, they began to communicate. Janus shared tales of Gorn history and culture, painting a picture of a proud, fierce race for whom strength and combat prowess were all. He spoke of his own long life, how he had survived many of these brutal rituals and now neared the age when he could withdraw with honor and take a place as an elder of the clan. One night, as they sat watching the alien stars wheel overhead, Janus made a startling confession. He told Brian of his mate, won in a previous ritual, and how she had died shortly after laying her eggs. There was a deep pain in Janus's eyes as he spoke, a wound that time had not healed. He then fixed Brian with an intense stare and said something that shook the human to his core. Janus wanted Brian to win. He believed that an outsider's victory might be the catalyst needed to change the Gorn's brutal ways, to end the cycle of senseless death. Brian was stunned, the weight of Janus's words settling heavily upon him. As the final challenge approached, the tension in the encampment was palpable. Crocs and his cronies glared daggers at Brian, their desire to see him dead a pulsing, palpable thing. But others looked at him with a strange mix of curiosity and grudging respect. Whispers began to circulate that the human might actually have a chance. Brian himself was a knot of nerves and anticipation. He knew everything hinged on the last trial, a vicious free-for-all, where the participants would battle until only one was left standing. It was a fight to the death, and Brian knew he would need every ounce of his strength, cunning, and luck to survive. The night before the challenge, Brian lay awake on the hard-packed dirt of his cage, his mind racing. He mentally reviewed every trick, every stratagem he had learned, looking for anything that might give him an edge. Exhaustion finally claimed him, and he drifted into a fitful sleep. His dreams a jumble of Earth, of home, and the cruel alien world he found himself in. In those last hazy moments before sleep claimed him fully, a grim realization settled over Brian. His actions in the coming day would not just determine his own fate, but potentially the fate of an entire species. It was a burden he had never asked for, but one he now carried nonetheless. In the darkness of his cage, light years from home, Brian steeled himself for the fight to come. The harsh alien sun rose over the jagged rocks of Gornax, casting long shadows across the barren landscape. Brian pulled himself from his makeshift shelter, muscles aching from days of brutal trials. He limped toward the circular arena where the final challenge awaited. Janus and Crocs were already there, along with a handful of other Gorn warriors. Their scales glinted in the early morning light as they gripped their weapons, long poles tipped with wicked blades. Brian's hand closed around his own spear, the unfamiliar weight a grim reminder of what was at stake. Janus caught Brian's eye and gave a subtle nod. Before Brian could respond, a deep gong reverberated through the air. The Gorn warriors surged forward with animalistic roars, spears clashing in a cacophony of metal on metal. As the fallen Gorn struggled to rise, Brian wrenched the spear from his grasp. Now armed, he whirled to face his next attacker. All around him, the sounds of combat filled the air. Grunts of exertion, cries of pain, the thud of bodies hitting the ground. Pain lanced through Brian's leg, as a glancing blow opened a gash along his thigh. He stumbled, vision blurring. Through the haze, he saw Crocs charging toward him, spear leveled at his heart. Time seemed to slow. Brian tensed, knowing he couldn't dodge in time. Suddenly Janus was there, his own weapon deflecting Crocs' killing blow. The two Gorn warriors squared off, spears a blur of motion between them. Seizing the moment, Brian lunged forward. Together he and Janus drove Crocs back. With a final devastating strike, Janus disarmed his opponent. Crocs fell to his knees, defeated. Silence descended on the arena. Brian found himself face to face with Janus, both of them bloodied and panting. The gathered Gorn watched with anxious anticipation, waiting to see who would make the first move. Murmurs of disbelief rippled through the onlookers. Some shouted in outrage, while others simply stared in confusion. Janus silenced them with a thunderous roar. "Brian has survived every trial we set before him," Janus continued. "He has shown courage, cunning, and strength. By our own laws, he has earned the right to choose a mate and continue our bloodline." All eyes turned to Brian. He swallowed hard, knowing his next words would change everything. I can't accept," he said, his voice hoarse. "I won't take a mate. I just want to fix my ship and go home." The crowd erupted into chaos. Gorn elders argued furiously among themselves, some decrying Brian's refusal as sacrilege, others wondering if it might be a sign their ways needed to change. In the midst of the uproar, Janus pulled Brian aside. "I have a proposal," the Gorn warrior said quietly. "Help me gather supplies. I'll assist you in repairing your vessel, but in exchange, I ask that you take me with you when you leave, along with a small group of females and young ones who wish to escape these deadly traditions." Brian stared at Janus, stunned by the request. After a moment, he nodded. "All right," he said, "let's do it." Over the next several days, Brian and Janus worked tirelessly to salvage parts from the wreckage of Brian's ship. As they toiled side by side, Brian began to grasp the full impact of what had transpired. His refusal to participate in the Gorn's brutal mating ritual had sparked something, a chance for this ancient race to chart a new course. Brian wiped the sweat from his brow as he tightened the last bolt on the makeshift hull patch. The battered spacecraft looked far from pretty, but it would fly. He stepped back, surveying his handiwork, when a commotion from the Gorn encampment caught his attention. A group of hulking Gorn warriors stomped towards him, led by Crocs. The scarred fighter's eyes blazed with hatred as he pointed an accusing claw at Brian. "Traitor!" Crocs bellowed at Janus, who stood protectively in front of Brian. "You dishonor our ancestors by helping this weakling escape." Janus planted his feet firmly, gripping his spear. "The human has proven himself, Crocs. By our own laws he—" "Enough!" Crocs roared, cutting him off. "Our laws say nothing of aliens defiling our sacred grounds." Brian's heart raced as the angry Gorn closed in. He glanced at the ship, gauging if he could make a run for it. But Janus stood his ground, rumbling a low warning. "Stand down, Crocs," Janus growled. "Your quarrel is with me." Crocs's forked tongue flicked out, tasting the air. "So be it, old one." With a primal scream, Crocs lunged forward. His spear clashed against Janus's with a resounding clang. The two Gorn warriors became a whirlwind of scales and flashing metal. Brian watched in awe as Janus, despite his age, matched Crocs blow for blow. Their spears were a blur, striking sparks with each impact. But Crocs's youth gave him an edge. A vicious swipe opened a gash in Janus's side, spilling dark green blood onto the dusty ground. As Janus staggered back, Brian's survival instincts kicked in. He sprinted to the ship, frantically waving at the Gorn females and younglings Janus had chosen to leave with them. "Hurry!" Brian shouted, helping them scramble aboard. "We have to go now!" Without thinking, Brian snatched up a fallen spear. He hurled it with all his might, praying his aim was true. The weapon whistled through the air, finding its mark in Crocs's broad back. Crocs whirled around, his eyes locking onto Brian with murderous intent. Time seemed to slow as Brian realized what he'd done. He braced himself for Crocs's charge, knowing he stood no chance against the enraged warrior. But the charge never came. A group of younger Gorn males suddenly blocked Crocs's path, their own spears leveled at the snarling hardliner. "Enough, Crocs," one of them growled. "The human has shown us a better way." More Gorn joined their ranks, forming a protective wall around Brian and the wounded Janus. Crocs snarled in disbelief, his head swiveling as he realized he was now outnumbered. With a final hateful glare at Brian, Crocs slunk away into the crowd. The tension broke, replaced by a cacophony of roars and bellows from the assembled Gorn. Brian rushed to Janus's side, helping the Gorn females apply a pungent salve to his wound. "You saved my life, human," Janus rumbled, his reptilian eyes meeting Brian's, "and perhaps the future of my people." Brian swallowed hard, still processing what had just happened. I just did what I had to do. You're the one who had the courage to stand up to tradition. Janus nodded, his gaze drifting to the crowd of Gorn. Their faces showed a mix of uncertainty and hope. It won't be easy, Janus said softly. But for the first time in ages we have a chance to break free from our cycle of violence. As Brian prepared the ship for takeoff, he couldn't help but feel the weight of what had transpired. He'd come to Gornax by accident, but somehow ended up changing the course of an entire civilization. The engines hummed to life, and Brian cast one last look at the alien world that had nearly claimed his life. As they broke atmosphere, a sense of purpose filled him. What other worlds awaited out there? What other lives could he touch? The ship's engines hummed softly as Brian guided it through the vast expanse of space. His hands moved deftly over the controls, making minor adjustments to their course. Beside him, Janus sat in silence, his reptilian eyes fixed on the star-studded void beyond the viewport. Brian glanced at the Gorn warrior, noting the way Janus's scales caught the dim light of the cockpit. The wounds from his confrontation with Crocs were healing, but Brian could see the tension in Janus's posture. It was a stark reminder of all they'd left behind. "How are you holding up?" Brian asked, his voice low to avoid disturbing the quiet. Janus turned, his gaze meeting Brian's. "I am adapting," he rumbled. "It is strange to be here among the stars. For so long my world was all I knew." Brian nodded, understanding the weight of Janus's words. He'd felt something similar when he'd first left Earth, though under very different circumstances. "And the others?" Brian inquired, jerking his head towards the cargo hold where the Gorn refugees huddled. Janus's expression softened slightly. "They are scared but hopeful. Your actions have given them a chance at a life free from the cycles of violence that have defined our people for so long." Brian swallowed hard, the enormity of what they'd done hitting him anew. He'd come to Gornax as an explorer, crash-landing on an alien world. Now he was responsible for the future of these refugees, these brave souls who dared to break free from centuries of tradition. "We'll find a place for them," Brian said, his voice firm with conviction. "Somewhere safe where they can build a new life." Janus nodded, his clawed hand resting on Brian's shoulder. "I believe you, human, but we must be cautious. The galaxy is vast, yes, but not empty. There are dangers out there, some we may not even be able to imagine." Brian's mind flashed to the pirates who'd been hunting him, the reason he'd ended up on Gornax in the first place. His mind focused as he considered the threat they posed. "There," Brian said, pointing to a cluster of systems near the edge of the map. "The Cygnus Reach. It's a region of space that's largely unexplored, lots of uninhabited worlds, dense nebulae that can hide our energy signatures." Brian grinned, a spark of excitement igniting in his chest. "That's the beauty of it. We'll be completely self-sufficient. I've got terraforming equipment in the hold, meant for setting up research outposts. With that and your people's strength and knowledge, we can build something new, something entirely our own." Janus considered this for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally he nodded. "A bold plan, human, but one with merit. It will not be easy, but then, nothing worth doing ever is." Brian's fingers flew over the navigation controls, plotting a course for the Cygnus Reach. As he worked, he felt a sense of purpose settling over him. This was more than just an adventure now. It was a mission, a chance to make a real difference in the lives of these refugees. "We'll need to make some stops along the way," Brian said, his mind already racing ahead. "Stock up on supplies, maybe pick up some additional equipment, but we'll have to be careful, avoid drawing attention to ourselves." Janus nodded in agreement. "I will speak with the others, prepare them for the journey ahead. It will be a new experience for all of us, but one we must face together." As the ship's engines hummed to life, accelerating them towards their uncertain future, Brian couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and trepidation. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but it was also filled with possibility. They were no longer just survivors fleeing a violent past. They were pioneers, setting out to forge a new destiny among the stars. and Brian was determined to see it through, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The ship shuddered violently as it entered the planetoid's thin atmosphere. Brian's fist clenched as he gripped the controls, fighting to keep the damaged craft steady. "Brace for impact," he shouted, his voice strained. With a bone-jarring crash, the ship slammed into the icy surface, skidding across jagged terrain before coming to a rest. For a moment, silence reigned. Then, the air filled with the hiss of escaping gases and the groans of the Gorn passengers. Brian unstrapped himself, his legs shaky as he stood. "Everyone all right?" he called out. Janus emerged from the passenger compartment, a thin trickle of green blood running down his scaled face. "We're alive," he rumbled. "But the ship?" Brian nodded grimly. "Let's assess the damage." As Janus gathered a small group for a scouting mission, Brian led the others outside to inspect the ship's exterior. The biting cold hit him like a physical blow, stealing his breath away. He pulled his jacket tighter, watching as his exhaled breath formed crystals in the air. Hours passed as Brian and the remaining Gorn worked tirelessly, patching what they could and taking inventory of their supplies. The work was grueling, made worse by the planet's wild temperature swings. One moment Brian was sweating through his clothes, the next his fingers were numb with cold. As the planet's distant sun began to set, casting long shadows across the icy landscape, Janus and his team returned. The look on the Gorn warrior's face told Brian everything he needed to know before a word was spoken. "Nothing," Janus reported, his voice heavy. "No life, no resources, just ice and rock as far as we could see." Brian nodded, trying to keep his expression neutral for the sake of the others. "Then we focus on the ship. It's our only way off this rock." Days blurred into weeks as they worked. Brian's hands grew calloused and scarred from the constant repairs. The Gorn, despite their natural strength, began to show signs of wear. Tempers flared in the close quarters, arguments breaking out over dwindling supplies. One particularly brutal day, after another failed attempt to reroute power to the engines, Brian found himself alone in the ship's reactor core. Frustration overwhelmed him, and he smacked his fist against a panel. To his surprise, the impact dislodged a small chunk of debris. Curious, Brian pried it loose. The fist-sized object was unlike anything he'd ever seen, pulsing with an eerie internal light. His handheld scanner went wild, registering intense radiation levels. The Gorn warrior appeared moments later, peering at the glowing chunk. Brian quickly explained his discovery and the potential it held. After a tense discussion, they agreed. Brian would handle the extraction and refinement personally, minimizing the risk to the radiation-sensitive Gorn. Donning a heavily shielded suit, Brian began the painstaking process. Each movement was agonizingly slow, the suit cumbersome and hot. Sweat poured down his face as he carefully manipulated the radioactive material. Hours turned into days as Brian worked, sleeping only when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him. Janus stood vigil, watching for any signs of radiation sickness. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Brian held up a small vial of refined, stable fuel. His hands shook from fatigue, but a triumphant grin spread across his face. "We did it," he breathed. "Now let's fire up those engines and get the hell out of here." As they prepared for takeoff, Brian and Janus pored over star charts, plotting their escape from the treacherous Veil Nebula. It was during this process that Brian noticed something odd, an encrypted file buried deep in the ship's databanks. Curiosity piqued. He set to work decrypting it. As the file opened, revealing its secrets, Brian's eyes widened in disbelief. "Janus," he called, voice barely above a whisper, "you need to see this." The Gorn leaned in, studying the holographic display. Star charts, navigational data, and at the center of it all, an image that defied comprehension, a massive artificial structure floating in the void of space. "What is it?" Janus asked, awe evident in his gravelly voice. Brian shook his head, still struggling to process what he was seeing. "I don't know, but it's out there just beyond the nebula. And I think it might be our best shot at finding a safe haven." They shared a look, understanding passing between them. This was more than just an opportunity for survival. It was a chance to uncover something truly extraordinary. With a sense of purpose they hadn't felt since leaving Gornax, Brian and Janus set a course for the mysterious construct. As the ship lifted off, leaving the barren planetoid behind, Brian couldn't shake the feeling that they were embarking on something far greater than they could possibly imagine. The ship entered the swirling chaos of the Veil Nebula, cosmic storms buffeting them from all sides. Brian's hands flew over the controls, making constant adjustments to keep them on course. The chamber thrummed with ancient power as Brian and Janus struggled to their feet. The air crackled with energy, and the holographic displays pulsed with an eerie, rhythmic glow. Brian's heart raced, his mind still reeling from the sensory overload he'd just experienced. "Janus, are you all right?" Brian called out, his voice echoing in the vast space. The Gorn warrior nodded, his scales glistening in the strange light. "I am functioning, but that experience—" Before Janus could finish, the disembodied voice of the Overseer filled the chamber once more. "Your arrival here was not by chance, children of the Gorn. You have been drawn to this place by forces beyond your comprehension." Brian stepped forward, his eyes darting around the room, searching for the source of the voice. "What do you mean? What forces?" The holographic displays shifted, showing images of stars, galaxies, and strange alien structures. Long ago, the progenitors of the Gorn achieved technological marvels beyond imagination, but with great power came great responsibility and great danger. Janus moved closer to the central pedestal, his clawed hand hovering over the intricate symbols. "Our ancestors, they were truly this advanced?" "Indeed," the Overseer replied, "but their achievements attracted the attention of others, beings of immense power and unfathomable motives. The Leviathan that pursued you is but one of their creations." Brian's blood ran cold as he remembered their narrow escape. That thing, it's still out there. As if in response to Brian's words, a distant rumble shook the chamber. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling, and the refugees huddled together in fear. "The sanctuary's defenses will hold," the Overseer assured them. "But time is short. You must learn the truth of your heritage, Janus, and the role you and your human companion are destined to play." The central pedestal began to glow more intensely, and a series of images flashed across the holographic displays. Brian and Janus watched in awe as the history of the Gorn civilization unfolded before their eyes, from their humble beginnings to their ascension as a galactic power. "Our people, we were not always bound to a single world?" Janus asked, his voice filled with wonder. "No," the Overseer replied. "The Gorn once ruled vast swathes of the galaxy, but with their power came hubris and eventually downfall." The images shifted, showing scenes of destruction and chaos. Massive ships, not unlike the Leviathan that had pursued them, rained devastation upon Gorn worlds. Brian felt a chill run down his spine. What happened? "The progenitors delved too deeply into forbidden knowledge," the Overseer explained. "They awakened forces beyond their control. In their desperation, they created this sanctuary, a final refuge to preserve their legacy and protect the future of their species." Janus stepped back from the pedestal, his eyes wide with realization. "And now we are that future?" "Indeed," the Overseer confirmed. "You and your companions are the last hope for the Gorn civilization. Within this structure lies the knowledge and technology to restore your people to their former glory, and to face the threats that still linger in the dark between the stars." Brian looked at Janus, seeing the weight of this revelation in his friend's eyes. "So what do we do now?" Before the Overseer could respond, another tremor shook the chamber, more violent than before. Alarms blared, and the holographic displays flickered ominously. "The Leviathan has breached the outer defenses," the Overseer announced, its voice tinged with urgency. "You must prepare yourselves. The true test of your worth is about to begin." Brian and Janus exchanged a determined look, both knowing that their greatest challenge lay ahead. As the chamber shuddered around them and the distant roar of the approaching Leviathan grew louder, they steeled themselves for the battle to come. The cavernous chamber buzzed with activity. Gorn scientists hunched over workstations, their clawed fingers dancing across holographic interfaces. The air crackled with energy as experimental weapons fired test blasts into reinforced target zones. Brian wiped sweat from his brow as he pored over a complex schematic. He blinked, trying to focus his tired eyes on the intricate web of circuitry before him. A hand clasped his shoulder, and he looked up to see Janus standing beside him. Brian shook his head. "No time. We're close to a breakthrough on the phase cannon. If we can just—" A sudden commotion from across the room cut him off. A young Gorn scientist waved frantically, calling them over. "We've got something," she exclaimed as Brian and Janus approached. "A gravitational anomaly just like the ones we've been tracking. It's faint, but it matches the Devourer's signature." Brian leaned in, studying the readouts. His heart raced as he recognized the telltale fluctuations. "Where?" The scientist tapped a few controls, bringing up a star chart. A red dot pulsed ominously near the edge of a distant sector. Here, about 3 days' travel at maximum warp. Janus's eyes narrowed. "That's too close to populated systems. If the Devourer strikes there—" "We can't let that happen," Brian said firmly. He turned to address the room. "This is it, people. Everything we've been working for. I need status reports on all projects now." The chamber erupted into a flurry of activity. Gorn rushed to and fro, compiling data and finalizing designs. Brian moved from station to station, reviewing progress and offering input where needed. "The phase cannons are operational," reported one team lead. "We've managed to increase output by 300% over the original designs." "Excellent," Brian nodded. "What about the shields?" Another Gorn stepped forward. "We've successfully integrated the quantum fluctuation tech. They should hold against even the Devourer's energy weapons, for a time." As the reports continued to pour in, Brian felt a mix of pride and apprehension. They'd accomplished so much in such a short time, but would it be enough? Janus appeared at his side once more, his voice low. "The ships are ready. We can begin loading equipment within the hour." Brian took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. He raised his voice, addressing the entire chamber. "Listen up. In 3 days we face our greatest challenge. The Devourer threatens not just the Gorn, but all life in this sector. We may be few, but we carry with us the legacy of a once great civilization. Today we honor that legacy. Today we take the fight to our ancient enemy." A deafening roar filled the chamber as the Gorn cheered, their scaled fists pumping the air. The sound of their unified voice sent chills down Brian's spine. As the cheers subsided, Brian locked eyes with Janus. No words were needed. They both understood the gravity of what lay ahead. With a nod, they turned and strode towards the hangar bay, ready to oversee the final preparations. The recycled air of the sanctuary gave way to the acrid smell of engine exhaust as they entered the vast docking area. Sleek, newly constructed ships stood ready, their hulls gleaming under the harsh lighting. Gorn crew members scurried about, loading equipment and running last-minute checks. Brian paused at the foot of the lead ship's boarding ramp, his hand resting on the cool metal. He gazed up at the vessel that would carry them into battle, a lump forming in his throat. So much hinged on the next few days. Janus stood beside him, his reptilian features set in a mask of fierce willpower. "Are you ready, my friend?" Brian nodded, pushing aside his doubts. "As ready as we'll ever be. Let's go hunting." The sanctuary hummed with frantic energy as Brian and Janus rushed through its winding corridors. Gorn technicians scurried about, their claws clicking against the metal floors as they made final adjustments to the newly constructed sensor array. Brian's heart raced as they entered the control room. Banks of holographic displays flickered to life, bathing the chamber in an eerie blue glow. He took a deep breath, steadying his nerves as he approached the main console. "This is it," he muttered, more to himself than to Janus. His fingers flew across the controls, initiating the startup sequence. The array came to life with a low, resonant thrum. Janus leaned in close, his reptilian eyes narrowed as he studied the readouts. "Are you certain this will work?" he asked, his gravelly voice tinged with doubt. Brian nodded, trying to project more confidence than he felt. If our calculations are correct, we should be able to detect the Devourer's signature from light years away. It'll give us the warning we need. No sooner had the words left his mouth than a piercing alarm cut through the air. The displays erupted in a frenzy of activity, data streams scrolling past faster than the eye could follow. "By the ancestors," Janus breathed, his massive frame tensing. "We're picking up a massive distortion just on the outer edges of the array's range." Brian's fingers danced across the console, cross-referencing the incoming data against their compiled research. His blood ran cold as the patterns aligned. "Those signatures, they match the Devourer's pattern almost perfectly," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Janus sprang into action, his booming voice cutting through the cacophony of alarms. "Sound the alert. Prepare all defensive systems and ready the strike craft. The Devourer approaches." The sanctuary exploded into chaos. Gorn warriors and refugees alike scrambled to their assigned stations. In the vast hangar bays, experimental ships roared to life, their engines glowing with barely contained power. Brian found himself swept up in the tide of activity, barking orders and coordinating with Janus and the Gorn tacticians. On the main display, a terrifying image coalesced, a vast, writhing anomaly that seemed to consume everything in its path. One of the Gorn tacticians hissed, his scales paling visibly. "The readings are off the charts. That thing is larger than entire star systems." Brian's mind raced, desperately searching for a solution. "We can't take that thing head-on, not with our limited resources." Janus nodded grimly. "Then we must strike at its heart, find a way to disrupt or destabilize it from within." A desperate idea struck Brian. "What about the Sanctuary's power core? Could we overload it? Use it as a makeshift weapon against the Devourer?" The Gorn tacticians exchanged uneasy glances, but Janus's eyes blazed with persistence. "A risky proposition, but one that may be our only hope. Prepare the core for overload, and ready a strike team to deliver the payload directly into the heart of the Devourer." Time seemed to blur as Brian threw himself into the preparations. He worked alongside Janus and the Gorn engineers, recalibrating the Sanctuary's massive power core for the dangerous overload maneuver. Finally, as the Devourer's ominous presence loomed ever closer, the strike team assembled. Brian found himself boarding one of the sleek, advanced strike craft alongside Janus and a hand-picked cadre of Gorn warriors. The hangar bay doors yawned open, revealing the star-studded expanse of space. With a thunderous roar, the strike craft launched, their experimental warp drives propelling them towards the cosmic maelstrom at unimaginable speeds. As they drew nearer to the Devourer, Brian felt his breath catch in his throat. The entity was beyond comprehension, a cosmic behemoth that dwarfed entire star systems. "Brace yourselves," Janus bellowed, his clawed hands gripping the controls. "We're going in." The strike craft plunged into the roiling heart of the Devourer. For a moment, reality itself seemed to warp and twist around them. Then, with a bone-jarring lurch, they emerged into a nightmarish realm beyond imagination. Shards of twisted matter and energy swirled around them, the remnants of countless consumed worlds. Brian's fingers flew across the control panel, preparing for their one desperate chance. "Then we'd better make this count," he said, his voice tight with tension. "Preparing to overload the core in 3, 2, 1. The power core detonated with a thunderous roar, unleashing a cataclysmic burst of energy that tore through the Devourer's heart. The strike craft shuddered violently, alarms blaring as their shields strained against the onslaught. For a heart-stopping moment, Brian feared they had failed. Then, like a dying star collapsing in on itself, the Devourer began to convulse and unravel. "We did it," Brian whispered, scarcely able to believe it. "We actually did it." As they streaked clear of the collapsing anomaly, Janus let out a triumphant roar that seemed to shake the very fabric of space. "This day, we have struck a blow for our ancestors. The Devourer has been vanquished, its threat to our kind, and the galaxy at large, ended once and for all." They emerged back into normal space, to a cacophony of cheers from the assembled Gorn ships and the sanctuary itself. As the euphoria of victory washed over him, Brian realized they had achieved something truly monumental, not just the defeat of an ancient threat, but the restoration of the Gorn's rightful place among the stars. As he looked out at the vast, uncharted reaches of the galaxy, Brian felt a sense of boundless possibility. Their greatest adventures, he knew, were only just beginning. The acrid smell of smoke and ozone filled Brian's nostrils as he scrambled to his feet. The scout ship's interior was a chaotic mess of sparking wires and twisted metal. Through the cracked viewport, he could see the harsh, red-tinged landscape of Kragus Prime stretching out before them. Janus stood at the command console, his scaled fingers flying over the controls. "Damage report," he barked. A young Gorn technician coughed, wiping soot from her eyes. "Engines are offline, shields at 12%. Communications array is damaged, but functional." Brian steadied himself against a bulkhead as another series of thumps reverberated through the hull. The sound of metal scraping against metal sent chills down his spine. Janus nodded grimly. "We must prepare to face them. Our words may be our only weapons now." The old warrior turned to address the battered crew. "Remember, we came here as emissaries of peace. We must show these Kragus warriors the strength of our convictions, not our arms." A thunderous boom echoed through the ship, followed by the hiss of escaping air. The airlock had been breached. Brian's heart raced as he heard the heavy footfalls of approaching Kragus warriors. He glanced at Janus, whose reptilian features were set in a mask of calm commitment. The inner airlock door groaned, then burst open in a shower of sparks. Through the haze of smoke, Brian saw the silhouettes of massive Gorn warriors, their scales glinting in the emergency lighting. Their eyes gleamed with a predatory hunger that made his blood run cold. The lead Kragus warrior, a behemoth even by Gorn standards, stepped forward. His voice was a low, menacing growl. "Intruders! You dare to violate our sacred space?" Brian felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Everything they had fought for, everything they hoped to achieve, hinged on what happened next. He took a deep breath and stepped forward, hands raised in a gesture of peace. The Kragus warrior's eyes narrowed, his clawed hand tightening on the grip of a wickedly curved blade. "Learn from degenerate outsiders who have abandoned the true path?" Janus moved to stand beside Brian, his presence a comforting bulwark against the palpable hostility radiating from the Kragus warriors. "Brothers," he rumbled, "we are all children of the same ancestors. We have come to show you a new way forward, one that honors our past while embracing the future." For a tense moment, the only sound was the crackle of damaged equipment and the low hum of the Kragus warriors' energy weapons powering up. Brian held his breath, acutely aware that their lives hung by the thinnest of threads. Then, unexpectedly, a voice spoke from the back of the Kragus group. "Wait, let us hear what they have to say." The lead warrior whirled, his eyes flashing with anger. "Silence, Xerok. These outsiders bring nothing but corruption and weakness." But the dissenting voice persisted. "Our ancestors valued wisdom as well as strength. To refuse even to listen would dishonor their memory." The lead Kragus warrior snarled, clearly torn between his instinct for violence and the weight of tradition. Finally, he turned back to face Brian and Janus, his expression a mix of contempt and grudging curiosity. "Speak then, outsiders," he growled, "but know that if your words fail to convince us, your lives are forfeit." Brian swallowed hard, keenly aware of the precarious position they were in, but as he looked at Janus, saw the unwavering conviction in the old warrior's eyes, he felt a surge of willpower. This was their chance to bridge the gap between past and future, to unite a fractured people, and come what may, they would seize it with both hands. The acrid stench of ozone and burning metal filled Brian's nostrils as he struggled to draw breath. His body ached from the impact against the bulkhead, but survival instinct overrode the pain. Through bleary eyes, he watched the Kragus warlord loom over Janus and the fallen Gorn warriors. Energy crackled around the warlord's massive fist as it prepared to deliver the killing blow. Brian's fingers scrabbled against the deck, searching desperately for the energy staff he'd dropped. His hand closed around the weapon just as the warlord's arm began its downward arc. "Wait!" Brian croaked, his voice raw from the smoke. He dragged himself to his knees, raising the staff with trembling arms. "We didn't come here to fight." The warlord paused, its burning gaze shifting to Brian. The human felt the weight of that stare, ancient and terrible, boring into him. "You dare address me, puny outsider?" the warlord rumbled, its voice reverberating through the damaged ship. Brian swallowed hard, fighting to keep his voice steady. "We came seeking understanding, not conflict. There's so much we can learn from each other." A harsh, grating sound filled the air. Laughter, Brian realized with a start. The Kragu's warriors were laughing at him. Janus stirred at the warlord's feet, his scales scuffed and bloody. "Brother," he rasped, "we are all children of the same ancestors. We seek to honor our past while embracing the future." The warlord's eyes narrowed, its grip tightening on Janus's throat. "Silence, traitor. You have forsaken the true path, corrupted by the weakness of outsiders." Brian's mind raced, searching for words that might pierce the veil of centuries of isolation and suspicion. "Your strength is legendary," he said, gesturing to the Kragu's warriors. "But strength alone cannot secure a future for your people. The galaxy is changing, evolving. We can help you adapt to thrive in this new era without losing what makes you unique." For a moment, silence reigned. Even the sounds of battle seemed to fade away as the warlord considered Brian's words. Its face was an impassive mask, betraying no hint of its thoughts. "So you speak with conviction, human," the warlord said, its voice tinged with something almost like curiosity. "Perhaps there is more to you than I first believed." A ripple of surprise ran through the Kragu's ranks, but none dared question their leader's command. Slowly, weapons were lowered, though wary eyes remained fixed on Brian and the Gorn crew. Brian let out a shaky breath, scarcely able to believe the sudden turn of events. He met Janus's gaze, seeing his own mix of relief and trepidation mirrored in the old warrior's eyes. The warlord's massive form filled Brian's vision as it loomed over him. "Speak then, human. Show us this future you claim to offer. But know this, if your words prove false, if you seek to deceive us, your death will be slow and agonizing." Brian nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. This was their chance, perhaps their only chance, to bridge the gap between past and future, to unite a fractured people and chart a new course for the Gorn race. Drawing a deep breath, he began to speak, praying that his words would be enough to sway hearts hardened by centuries of isolation and mistrust. The acrid stench of scorched metal and ozone hung heavy in the air as Brian struggled to his feet. His ears rang from the deafening clash of energy weapons and the thunderous roars of Gorn warriors. Through the haze of smoke, he saw the massive form of the Kragu's warlord looming over him, taloned fist raised high. Time seemed to slow as Brian braced for the killing blow. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat stretching into eternity. Just as the warlord's strike began to fall, a piercing war cry shattered the moment. Janus burst from the shadows, his scales gleaming with sweat and blood. The old warrior's eyes blazed with defiance as he hurled himself at the warlord. Their bodies collided with a resounding crack, sending both combatants staggering. Brian watched in awe as Janus and the warlord became a whirlwind of slashing claws and crackling energy blades. Each blow sent shockwaves rippling through the air, the very deck plates beneath their feet buckling from the force of their clash. Seizing his chance, Brian snatched up a fallen energy staff. The weapon hummed to life in his hands, its familiar weight giving him a surge of confidence. He dove into the fray, ducking and weaving between the towering forms of Gorn warriors. His human agility proved invaluable as he darted between the lumbering Kragus, striking with quick jabs of his staff. Sparks flew as energy met scales, the air filling with the scent of singed flesh and the pained roars of wounded warriors. The tide of battle surged back and forth, neither side able to gain the upper hand. Brian found himself back-to-back with a battered Gorn warrior, both of them breathing heavily as they fended off attacks from all sides. Suddenly, a thunderous roar echoed through the compartment, drowning out even the din of battle. All eyes turned to the smoke-choked breach in the hull. A massive figure emerged, its very presence seeming to command the attention of friend and foe alike. Brian's jaw dropped as he beheld the newcomer. This was no ordinary Gorn. Its hide bore intricate markings and ritual scars, telling a story of countless battles and ancient wisdom. But it was the being's eyes that truly captivated him. They burned with an intensity that seemed to pierce the very soul. With a mere flick of its wrist, the elder Gorn unleashed a pulse of raw power. The shockwave sent warriors from both sides staggering, momentarily halting the conflict. In the sudden silence, the elder's voice boomed out, resonating with the weight of centuries. Brothers and sisters, too long have we been divided, torn asunder by the shackles of tradition and ritual bloodshed. The elder's words seemed to weave a spell over the assembled warriors. Even the Kragus, moments ago intent on slaughter, paused to listen. Brian felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end as the elder continued. The time has come to cast off the chains of the past and embrace a future forged in understanding and cooperation. For we are Gorn, a people born of the stars themselves, destined for greatness beyond the petty confines of violence and conflict. A ripple of energy seemed to pass through the Gorn warriors. Brian watched in amazement as their movements became more coordinated, their strikes more purposeful. With a resounding roar, they surged forward as one, pushing back against the Kragus forces. The warlord, its eyes burning with rage, redoubled its assault on Janus. Their battle took on a frenzied intensity, each blow threatening to tear reality itself asunder. But for every strike the warlord landed, Janus countered with two of his own, his movements guided by newfound conviction. As the battle reached its crescendo, the elder raised its massive form. Clawed hands stretched outward, raw power crackling between its fingers. A pulse of energy rippled outward, freezing combatants on both sides in place. Enough! The elder's voice shook the very foundations of the ship. The time for division and conflict is over. We are one people, united by blood and destiny, and no petty warlord or outdated tradition will stand in the way of our ascendance. With a resounding clap of its hands, the elder unleashed a shockwave of such force that the warlord was sent staggering backward. In that moment of weakness, Janus struck. His blade flashed in a series of precise strikes, disarming the once mighty Kragus leader. As the echoes of battle faded, Brian found himself surrounded by a scene of quiet triumph. Kragus warriors knelt, their weapons cast aside in surrender. At the center of it all stood Janus and the elder, their forms radiating a sense of purpose and unity unlike anything Brian had ever witnessed. The elder's gaze swept across the assembled Gorn, its voice rumbling with the promise of a new future. This is but the first step on a long and arduous path, my brothers and sisters, but together, as one people united in purpose and understanding, we shall forge a destiny that will echo through the ages. Brian watched as the last of the Kragus warriors bowed their heads in reverence. The shackles of tradition and violence lay shattered, giving way to the dawn of a new era. As Gorn from both factions began to tend to their wounded and secure the battered scout ship, Brian caught Janus's eye. The old warrior's reptilian gaze burned with renewed purpose, and Brian knew that their greatest challenges and most remarkable adventures were only just beginning. Brian's eyes stung from the acrid smoke that still lingered in the air as he surveyed the ruins of the Kragus stronghold. The once imposing fortress now lay in shambles, its twisted metal and shattered stone a testament to the fierce battle that had raged here mere hours ago. But it wasn't the destruction that held Brian's attention, it was the transformation unfolding before him. Gorn warriors, their scales still bearing the marks of combat, huddled around holographic displays that flickered to life amidst the debris. The air buzzed with murmurs of awe and disbelief as images of long-forgotten Gorn achievements danced before their eyes. "Look at this," a gruff voice rumbled nearby. Brian turned to see a burly Kragus warrior, his armor dented and scored, gesturing to a hovering schematic. "Our ancestors built vessels that could traverse entire galaxies. How did we forget?" Brian stepped closer, careful not to startle the awestruck Gorn. "It's been buried for a long time," he said softly, "but it's not lost. Not anymore." The warrior's eyes, once filled with battle rage, now shimmered with a mix of wonder and shame. "We were blind," he growled, "trapped in our own ignorance." A commotion near the stronghold's central chamber drew Brian's attention. He weaved through the gathered Gorn, their massive forms parting to reveal Janus, locked in intense discussion with a group of former Kragus officers. But how can we be sure this isn't some elaborate deception?" one of the officers was saying, his voice tinged with lingering suspicion. Janus's response was measured, patient. "You've seen the evidence with your own eyes. Feel it in your bones. This knowledge, this legacy, it resonates with something deep inside us all, something that's been silenced for far too long." Brian watched as understanding dawned on the officers' faces. One by one they nodded, scales rippling as tension visibly drained from their bodies. A thunderous crash echoed through the chamber, and Brian spun to see a group of Gorn tearing down a massive banner bearing the warlord's insignia. As the tattered cloth fell, a cheer rose from the assembled warriors, not a battle cry, but a sound of pure, unbridled joy. "Brian," Janus called, waving him over. "Come, there's work to be done." As Brian joined his friend, he couldn't help but marvel at the change that had come over the old warrior. Janus stood taller, his eyes bright with purpose. "We've received word from the other strike teams," Janus said, his voice low but thrumming with excitement. "The holdouts are falling one by one, not to violence but to truth." A commotion at the chamber's entrance drew their attention. The elder Gorn strode in, its massive form seeming to fill the space with an aura of ancient wisdom. The gathered warriors fell silent, all eyes fixed on the revered figure. "My children," the elder's voice resonated through the chamber, "today marks not an ending but a beginning. We stand on the threshold of a new era for our people." Brian watched in awe as the elder's words washed over the assembled Gorn. Hardened warriors and scientists alike hung on every syllable, their faces transformed by the power of revelation. "The path ahead will not be easy," the elder continued. "We have much to unlearn and even more to rediscover. But together, united in purpose and understanding, there is no challenge we cannot overcome." As the elder's speech concluded, a ripple of energy seemed to pass through the gathered Gorn. Warriors clasped arms with former enemies, scientists eagerly shared discoveries with wide-eyed listeners. The air hummed with possibility. Brian felt a hand on his shoulder and turned to see Janus, the old warrior's eyes gleaming with pride and hope. "Look at them, my friend," Janus said softly. "This is the true face of our people, not the masks of violence we've worn for so long, but the seekers of knowledge and explorers of the cosmos we were always meant to be." Brian nodded, his heart swelling with a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. As he watched the Gorn begin the monumental task of rebuilding their civilization, he knew that this was only the beginning. The stars beckoned, promising adventures and discoveries beyond imagining. And the Gorn, newly awakened to their true potential, were ready to answer that call. Brian's heart raced as he stood on the observation deck of the newly reassembled sanctuary. The vast expanse of space stretched out before him, dotted with unfamiliar constellations and the faint glow of distant galaxies. He pressed his hand against the transparent alloy viewport, feeling the subtle vibrations of the megastructure's systems humming to life. "Quite a view, isn't it?" Janus's gravelly voice startled Brian from his reverie. The Gorn warrior stepped up beside him, his scaled form reflecting the starlight. Brian nodded, unable to tear his gaze away from the cosmic panorama. "It's overwhelming. To think we actually moved this entire structure across light-years of space." Janus rumbled in agreement. "Our ancestors would be proud, but our work is just the beginning." As if on cue, a holographic display flickered to life beside them, projecting a three-dimensional map of the surrounding star systems. Glowing markers indicated potential targets for their planned expeditions. "The first scout ships are ready for launch," Janus said, his clawed finger tracing a path through the holographic stars. "We've identified several promising worlds within range of our long-range sensors." Brian leaned in, studying the swirling mass of data. Any signs of intelligent life? Janus shook his massive head. Nothing conclusive, but there are anomalies, energy signatures that don't match known natural phenomena. It's time we investigated firsthand. The observation deck's doors hissed open, and a young Gorn scientist hurried in, her scales gleaming with excitement. "Honored ones," she said, bowing her head respectfully. "The first expedition team is assembled and awaiting your final briefing." Brian and Janus exchanged a look of shared anticipation. This was it, the moment they'd been working towards for months. They made their way to the launch bay, a cavernous space filled with sleek, newly constructed scout ships. Gorn of all ages and former factions bustled about, making last-minute preparations. The air crackled with an electric mix of excitement and nervous energy. As Brian and Janus approached the gathered expedition team, a hush fell over the crowd. These weren't hardened warriors, but scientists and explorers, their eyes shining with the promise of discovery. Janus stepped forward, his voice carrying easily across the bay. "My friends, today we take our first steps into a new era for our people. You carry with you not just the hopes and dreams of the Gorn, but the very essence of who we truly are, seekers of knowledge, explorers of the unknown." Brian watched as the Gorn crew members straightened, their chests swelling with pride. He could feel the weight of the moment, the sense that they stood on the precipice of something truly monumental. "Remember," Janus continued, "our strength lies not in conquest but in understanding. Go forth with open minds and eager hearts. The wonders that await us out there may challenge everything we thought we knew about the universe and ourselves." As the briefing concluded, Brian found himself drawn to one of the scout ships. He ran his hand along its smooth hull, marveling at the elegant fusion of Gorn and human engineering principles. "You know," Janus said, coming up beside him, "we could use someone with your unique perspective on this first expedition." Brian's pulse quickened at the thought. To be among the first to set foot on a truly alien world, to push the boundaries of known space, it was everything he'd ever dreamed of. "Count me in," he said without hesitation. The next hours passed in a blur of final preparations and equipment checks. Before Brian knew it, he was strapped into the co-pilot's seat of the lead scout ship, the low thrum of its engines vibrating through his body. As the massive launch bay doors slowly parted, revealing the star-studded void beyond, Brian felt a surge of exhilaration unlike anything he'd ever experienced. This was more than just an expedition. It was the dawn of a new age for the Gorn, and he was honored to be a part of it. The scout ship's pilot, a grizzled Gorn veteran named Kraz, gave Brian a toothy grin. "Ready to make history, human?" Brian nodded, his fingers dancing over the control console as he initiated the launch sequence. "Let's see what's out there." With a burst of blue-white energy, the scout ship shot forward, leading a small flotilla of exploratory vessels into the uncharted depths of space. As they accelerated to warp speed, leaving the sanctuary behind, Brian couldn't help but feel that this was only the beginning of an adventure beyond his wildest imagination. The sleek scout ship sliced through the inky void, its experimental warp drive humming with barely contained power. Brian sat at the helm, his fingers dancing across the holographic controls as he made minute adjustments to their course. The bridge buzzed with activity as Gorn scientists and warriors alike pored over the incoming data streams. "Energy signature intensifying," reported Zix, a young Gorn scientist whose scales shimmered with excitement. "We're definitely closing in on something big." Brian nodded, his eyes fixed on the monitor. "Any visual confirmation yet?" "Negative," growled Kraz, the grizzled veteran pilot. "But these readings, I've never seen anything like it." As if on cue, the ship's sensors pinged urgently. A massive structure slowly materialized on the monitor, emerging from the star-flecked darkness like a behemoth rising from the depths. Gasps of awe and disbelief rippled through the bridge crew. The object before them defied easy description, a sprawling latticework of gleaming metal and pulsing energy fields that stretched for thousands of kilometers in every direction. "By the ancestors," breathed Saxa, the ship's chief engineer. "The power readings from that thing are off the charts. It's putting out more energy than a small star." Brian leaned forward, his heart racing. "Can we get any closer? I want to see if we can identify any specific structures or potential entry points." Kraz grunted an affirmative, his clawed hands expertly guiding the ship on a careful approach vector. As they drew nearer, previously unseen details came into focus, vast chambers and corridors that seemed to shift and reconfigure themselves even as they watched. "This level of engineering," Zix murmured, her eyes wide with wonder. "It's beyond anything in our historical records. Who could have built such a thing?" Before anyone could respond, a brilliant beam of energy lanced out from the massive structure, bathing their ship in a scintillating light. Alarms blared as the crew braced for impact, but the expected destruction never came. Instead, the ship's systems began to hum with newfound power. Displays flickered and changed, flooding with streams of data in an unfamiliar script. "We're being scanned," Brian realized, his fingers flying over the controls, "and I think it's trying to communicate." The view screen erupted in a dazzling array of colors and geometric patterns, pulsing in complex sequences that seemed just on the edge of comprehension. The Gorn crew watched in stunned silence, their reptilian features frozen in expressions of awe and trepidation. "Can we decipher any of this?" Brian asked, turning to Zix. The young scientist shook her head, scales rippling with frustration. "It's unlike any language or code we've ever encountered, but there's definitely a pattern to it. Give me some time, and I might be able to crack it." Brian nodded, his mind racing with possibilities. "All right, let's hold position here and—" His words were cut short as the ship suddenly lurched, caught in an invisible grip. The massive structure before them seemed to open like a flower in bloom, revealing a cavernous docking bay that pulsed with otherworldly energy. "We're being pulled in," Kraz snarled, his muscles straining as he fought the controls. Brian's hands flew over the command console, but every system he tried to engage was unresponsive. "Looks like we don't have a choice," he said, forcing calm into his voice. "All hands, prepare for whatever comes next." As the scout ship was inexorably drawn into the heart of the colossal structure, Brian exchanged a tense look with his Gorn crewmates. They had come seeking answers, and now it seemed those answers were about to find them, ready or not. The docking bay engulfed them, plunging the ship into a sea of shimmering, multi-hued light. As the external cameras adjusted, Brian caught glimpses of impossibly intricate machinery and swirling energy fields that defied the laws of physics as he understood them. "Zix," he called out, never taking his eyes off the view screen. "Any progress on that translation?" The young scientist's claws flew over her console with frantic intensity. I think I'm starting to see patterns. It's not a language exactly, more like pure information, encoded in ways we've never imagined." Suddenly a new presence made itself known, not through sight or sound, but as a tangible pressure on their minds. Brian gasped, feeling as if his very thoughts were being gently probed and examined. "Is everyone else feeling that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Nods and murmurs of affirmation rippled through the bridge crew. Whatever force controlled this vast structure, it was now turning its attention fully upon them. As the scout ship settled onto a glowing platform, Brian took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. They had come seeking knowledge and understanding, and now they stood on the threshold of discoveries beyond their wildest dreams, or nightmares. "All right," he said, rising from his seat. "Let's see what's out there. Remember our mission. We're here to learn, not to fight, but stay alert. We don't know what we're dealing with yet." With a hiss of equalizing pressure, the ship's main airlock cycled open. Brian stepped forward, leading his team of Gorn explorers into the unknown depths of the mysterious megastructure. Each step carried them further from the familiar and deeper into a realm of cosmic wonders that would challenge everything they thought they knew about the universe and their place within it. Brian's fingers danced across the control panel, his eyes darting between the flickering readouts and the vast megastructure looming before them. The scout ship's engines hummed softly as they approached the anomaly, its massive form dwarfing their vessel. "Energy signature intensifying," the Gorn technician reported, her scaled hands moving swiftly over her console. "Captain Stevens, these readings are unprecedented. The power output it's beyond anything in our databases." Brian leaned forward, his breath catching in his throat as the view screen filled with the alien construct. Intricate lattices of gleaming metal stretched for thousands of kilometers, punctuated by towering spires that pulsed with an eerie, bioluminescent glow. "Janus," Brian called, his voice tight with a mixture of awe and apprehension. "What do you make of this?" The old Gorn warrior moved to stand beside him, his reptilian eyes wide as he took in the sight. "By the ancestors," Janus rumbled, "I've never seen anything like it. This is no mere outpost or research station. The scale of this, it's almost beyond comprehension." As they drew closer, the true enormity of the megastructure became apparent. Continent-sized platforms stretched out in all directions, their surfaces adorned with arrays of unfathomable machinery. "I'm detecting quantum fluctuations, exotic particle emissions," the technician reported, her voice tinged with wonder and unease. "The technology at work here, it's like nothing we've ever encountered." Brian felt a chill run down his spine. Whatever created this megastructure possessed knowledge and capabilities far beyond their own. He opened his mouth to order a closer approach when suddenly warning klaxons blared to life. Brian's heart raced as he studied the telemetry. High-energy beams of unknown origin swept across their hull, probing and analyzing. The scout ship lurched violently as its experimental thrusters fired, banking hard to starboard. For several tense moments they weaved and dodged through the megastructure's outer reaches, the scanning beams in relentless pursuit. Just as it seemed their luck might run out, the beams abruptly ceased. An eerie silence fell over the bridge, broken only by the sound of ragged breathing. "Report," Brian demanded, fighting to keep his voice steady. Before anyone could respond, a series of thunderous booms echoed through space. The megastructure before them began to shift and reconfigure, its lattices and spires moving with impossible fluidity. "By the ancestors," Janus breathed, "I think we've awakened something ancient." Brilliant energy beams lanced out from the heart of the structure, converging on their position with terrifying speed. "Brace for impact," Brian shouted, gripping the controls with white-knuckled intensity. The beams struck with devastating force, battering their experimental shields and sending shockwaves through the hull. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed the ship might be torn apart. Then, as suddenly as it began, the assault ceased. "Shields at 15%, came the shaky response. "But we're still intact. We should have been vaporized by that kind of firepower." Before Brian could process this information, holographic displays sprang to life around the bridge. At first, they showed only swirling vortices of alien data. Then, guided by some unseen intelligence, the images coalesced into breathtaking vistas. Impossible cityscapes stretched across the displays, their architecture defying all known laws of physics. Among them moved beings of staggering complexity, their very forms challenging the crew's understanding of life itself. "What are we seeing?" a Gorn warrior whispered, her voice trembling with awe and unease. The holograms shifted again, revealing megastructures that dwarfed even the one before them. Each pulsed with energies beyond their comprehension, hinting at technologies that bordered on the divine. Then, as quickly as they appeared, the holograms vanished, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Janus broke the quiet, his gravelly voice carrying the weight of revelation. "My friends," he intoned, "I fear we've glimpsed the legacy of an intelligence far beyond our own, one that may have shaped the very cosmos itself." Brian felt a profound sense of humility wash over him. They had sought answers, but instead found mysteries beyond imagining. As the scout ship drifted in the shadow of the silent megastructure, he knew their journey had only just begun. For out there among the stars lay wonders that would forever change their understanding of existence itself. The scout ship shuddered violently as another wave of energy washed over its hull. Brian's nucleus tightened as he gripped the edge of the command console, his eyes darting between the flickering readouts and the swirling chaos visible through the viewports. Brian nodded grimly, his mind racing. "Kraz, can you get us any distance from the epicenter?" As if to punctuate Kraz's words, the vast megastructure before them pulsed with blinding intensity. Impossibly intricate patterns of light and energy danced across its surface, each fluctuation sending ripples through the very fabric of space-time. "By the ancestors," Janus breathed, his reptilian eyes wide with a mixture of awe and apprehension. "Look at the scale of it. It's as if we're witnessing the birth of a new universe." Brian opened his mouth to respond, but his words were drowned out by a deafening boom that reverberated through the ship's hull. The viewscreen erupted in a dazzling array of colors and geometric shapes, pulsating with an intensity that threatened to overwhelm their senses. "Captain," Saxa shouted from her engineering station, "I'm detecting massive power fluctuations throughout all systems. Whatever that thing is doing, it's affecting us at a quantum level." Brian's heart raced as he processed the flood of information. They were witnessing something beyond the scope of their understanding, forces that could reshape reality itself. And yet, despite the danger, he couldn't help but feel a sense of exhilaration coursing through his veins. "All right, everyone," he called out, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Let's focus on what we can control. Zix, I want a full-spectrum analysis of those energy patterns. Saxa, see if you can recalibrate our shields to better withstand these fluctuations. Kraz, keep us as stable as you can." As the crew sprang into action, Brian turned to Janus, noting the fierce gleam in the old warrior's eyes. "What do you make of all this, old friend?" Janus rumbled deep in his throat, his scaled fingers tracing the outline of the megastructure on a nearby display. "We stand at the precipice of something truly momentous, Brian. Whatever intelligence has created this, they possess power beyond our wildest imaginings. The question is, what do they intend to do with it?" Before Brian could respond, a brilliant lance of energy erupted from the heart of the megastructure, bathing the scout ship in a scintillating light. Alarms blared as systems throughout the vessel surged with newfound power. The main viewscreen flickered to life, awash with streams of data in an alien script that shifted and changed, even as they watched. Brian leaned forward, his eyes straining to make sense of the cosmic tapestry unfolding before them. "This is it," he breathed, a sense of profound wonder washing over him. "This is why we came out here, to push beyond the boundaries of the known, to seek out new frontiers of knowledge and understanding." As the crew of the scout ship grappled with the momentous events unfolding around them, Brian couldn't help but feel that they stood on the cusp of a new era. Whatever secrets the universe held, whatever cosmic wonders awaited them, they would face them together, human and Gorn alike, united in their quest for knowledge and exploration. The megastructure pulsed once more, its energy tendrils reaching out to envelop their tiny vessel, and as the scout ship was drawn inexorably into the heart of the cosmic mystery, Brian knew that their greatest adventure was only just beginning. The scout ship shuddered violently as it emerged from the turbulent region of space. Brian's hands flew across the control panel, frantically adjusting systems to stabilize their trajectory. Warning lights flashed across the bridge, casting an eerie red glow over the crew's tense faces. "Status report!" Brian barked, his eyes darting between the flickering displays. Zix, the Gorn technician, responded with a hiss of concern. "Multiple systems compromised, Captain. Hull integrity at 62%, shields offline, warp drive inoperable." Brian's eyes hardened as he processed the information. They were alive, but barely. The experimental craft had been pushed far beyond its design limits. Janus lumbered over to Brian's side, his reptilian eyes narrowed as he studied the sensor readings. "The construct, it's gone. But these readings—" He gestured to a series of incomprehensible data streams scrolling across the screen. "I've never seen anything like this." Brian leaned in, his brow furrowing as he tried to make sense of the information. The display showed a dizzying array of quantum fluctuations and exotic particle emissions that defied all known laws of physics. A loud crack echoed through the ship, followed by the hiss of escaping atmosphere. Alarms blared as emergency force fields snapped into place, containing the breach. "We need to find a safe harbor," Brian announced, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Somewhere to make repairs and process this data." Janus nodded grimly. "Agreed, but where? We're in uncharted space far beyond the boundaries of known civilization." As if in answer to their dilemma, a series of strange signals began to pulse across the communication array. Brian's eyes widened as he realized the impossibility of what he was seeing. "These signals, they're using frequencies we shouldn't be able to detect," he breathed, his fingers dancing across the console as he attempted to decipher the transmission. The main view screen flickered to life, revealing a swirling vortex of energy unlike anything they had ever encountered. Within its depths, ghostly images began to take shape, vast cities of impossible architecture, beings of pure energy, and technologies that bordered on the divine. "By the ancestors," Janus rumbled, his scaled skin paling at the sight, "what are we witnessing?" Before Brian could respond, the ship lurched violently, caught in the grip of an unseen force. The stars outside the viewports began to blur and stretch as they were pulled inexorably towards the heart of the cosmic maelstrom. The scout ship plunged into the swirling vortex, reality itself seeming to bend and warp around them. For several heart-stopping moments, the very fabric of space-time twisted and contorted, threatening to tear the vessel apart. And then, with a final bone-jarring lurch, they emerged into a realm beyond imagination. The viewports revealed a vast expanse of shimmering energy, dotted with structures that defied comprehension, megastructures that dwarfed entire star systems, pulsing with power beyond mortal understanding. As the battered scout ship drifted in this sea of cosmic wonders, Brian exchanged a look of stunned disbelief with Janus. They had crossed a threshold into a new frontier of exploration, one that would challenge everything they thought they knew about the universe and their place within it. The journey into the unknown had only just begun. The scout ship shuddered violently as another wave of energy washed over its hull. Brian's fingers danced across the control panel, fighting to keep the vessel stable amidst the cosmic maelstrom. Sweat beaded on his brow as he called out, "Zix, what's our status?" The Gorn technician's claws clacked rapidly against her console. "Hull integrity holding at 58%, Captain. But these energy fluctuations are unlike anything in our databases. I can't predict how long our systems will withstand this assault." Brian nodded grimly, his eyes fixed on the vast megastructure that filled their viewports. Its intricate lattices pulsed with an otherworldly light, each pulse sending ripples through the very fabric of space-time. The sheer scale of it defied comprehension. Entire star systems could have been nested within its sprawling architecture. "Janus?" Brian called out, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Any theories on what we're dealing with here?" As if in response to Janus's words, a series of massive energy tendrils erupted from the megastructure's surface. They writhed and twisted through the void, probing outward with an unsettling intelligence. "Evasive action!" Brian barked, his hands flying over the controls. The scout ship lurched sickeningly as it dove and weaved, narrowly avoiding the grasping energy tentacles. Alarms blared as one tendril grazed their port nacelle. Sparks erupted from a nearby console, filling the bridge with the acrid stench of burning circuitry. Brian's mind raced, searching for options. They were outmatched, outgunned, and trapped in the gravitational embrace of an entity beyond their comprehension. And yet, a part of him couldn't help but marvel at the cosmic wonders unfolding before them. Suddenly the megastructure pulsed with blinding intensity. The energy tendrils retracted, and for a moment, an eerie calm descended upon the battered scout ship. Before anyone could respond, a wave of exotic particles washed over the vessel. The main view screen erupted in a dazzling array of colors and geometric patterns, pulsating with an intensity that threatened to overwhelm their senses. Brian felt a strange pressure building inside his skull, as if something vast and ancient was probing the very edges of his consciousness. He glanced around the bridge, seeing the same mixture of awe and terror reflected in the eyes of his crew. "It's communicating," he breathed, struggling to process the flood of information assaulting his mind, or trying to, at least. The pulsating patterns on the interface coalesced into streams of alien script, shifting and changing even as they watched. Brian leaned forward, his eyes straining to make sense of the cosmic tapestry unfolding before them. "This is it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is why we came out here, to push beyond the boundaries of the known, to seek out new frontiers of knowledge and understanding." As the crew of the scout ship grappled with the momentous events unfolding around them, Brian couldn't help but feel that they stood on the cusp of a new era. Whatever secrets the universe held, whatever cosmic wonders awaited them, they would face them together, human and Gorn alike, united in their quest for knowledge and exploration. The megastructure pulsed once more, its energy tendrils reaching out to envelop their tiny vessel, and as the scout ship was drawn inexorably into the heart of the cosmic mystery, Brian knew that their greatest adventure was only just beginning. The scout ship's bridge pulsed with an otherworldly energy as holographic displays flickered to life, flooding the cramped space with a kaleidoscope of alien data. Brian's eyes widened, his fingers instinctively gripping the edge of his command console as he struggled to process the information assault. "What in the name of—" he breathed, words failing him as the swirling vortices of incomprehensible glyphs began to coalesce into startlingly lifelike images. Before the stunned crew, vast megastructures materialized, impossibly massive constructs that dwarfed entire star systems. Towering spires of dark matter pierced the fabric of space-time itself, while vast energy webs pulsed with power beyond mortal comprehension. Brian could only nod mutely, his gaze transfixed by the scenes unfolding before them. Amidst the cosmic vistas, he caught glimpses of the architects themselves, beings of such immense scale and complexity that his mind reeled trying to comprehend their very existence. Janus lumbered forward, his reptilian eyes wide with a mixture of awe and primal fear. "By the ancestors," he rumbled, "these creatures, they're reshaping entire galaxies as if they were children's toys." As if triggered by the Gorn's words, the holographic display shifted. Brian's breath caught in his throat as he witnessed entire star systems consumed in a heartbeat, reduced to fuel for the insatiable hunger of these cosmic entities. Suddenly, a deep, resonant tone reverberated through the bridge. Brian felt it in his bones, in the very core of his being. The sound defied description. It was as if the universe itself was trying to speak. Janus's scaled hand clamped down on Brian's shoulder, his claws digging in with uncharacteristic urgency. "Captain," the old warrior hissed, "those tones, it's a language. They're trying to communicate." As if in response, the holographic displays intensified. The swirling vortices of data coalesced into patterns of mind-bending complexity. Brian felt something fundamental shift within his consciousness as he struggled to comprehend the alien information. Flashes of understanding, fleeting and incomplete, flickered through his mind. He saw the birth and death of universes, witnessed the architect's relentless pursuit of knowledge and transcendence. I can almost understand," Brian gasped, his voice strained. "It's like they're opening our minds, showing us—" His words trailed off as a new vision unfolded, a glimpse of existence beyond the physical, where the boundaries between matter, energy and consciousness blurred into a singular, unified state of being. The intensity of the experience threatened to overwhelm him, Brian's fingers tightening as he gripped his chair, fighting to maintain his grasp on reality. Beside him, Janus and the other Gorn stood rigid, their scaled features contorted in a mixture of rapture and terror. "Captain," one of the Gorn technicians pleaded, her voice trembling, "what's happening to us?" Brian shook his head, struggling to form words, as the cosmic revelations continued to wash over him. We've made contact," he managed to rasp. with something beyond anything we could have imagined. The holographic displays pulsed with renewed intensity, their incomprehensible harmonics resonating through the very fabric of the scout ship. Brian felt a profound sense of vertigo, as if he stood at the precipice of a new age of understanding, one that would forever redefine humanity's place in the cosmos. As the relentless torrent of information continued to assault their senses, Brian couldn't shake the feeling that they had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. They were no longer mere explorers, but unwitting harbingers of a cosmic revelation that would reshape the very foundations of existence itself. The scout ship lurched violently, tossed about like a leaf in a cosmic storm. Brian's fingers dug into the edges of his console, his muscles straining as he fought to maintain his position. The bridge erupted in a cacophony of alarms and warning klaxons, the air thick with tension and the acrid smell of overheating circuitry. "Structural integrity at 47% and falling," Zix shouted, her claws flying across her station. "We're being torn apart." Brian's eyes darted across the flickering displays, desperately searching for a way out of this maelstrom. The holographic projections pulsed and writhed, assaulting his senses with an incomprehensible barrage of alien data. Each burst of information sent a spike of pain through his skull, threatening to overwhelm his consciousness. Suddenly, a faint flicker caught his attention. Amidst the chaos of quantum fluctuations and exotic particle emissions, a barely perceptible energy trail stood out. It was unlike anything they had encountered in the architect's realm, a thin thread of coherence in a sea of cosmic madness. The old Gorn warrior swiveled his massive head, reptilian eyes narrowing as he focused on Brian's console. His scaled fingers danced across the controls, enhancing and isolating the anomalous reading. "By the ancestors," Janus rumbled, a note of awe creeping into his gravelly voice. "You're right, human. This could be our way out." Without hesitation, Janus barked a series of orders to the bridge crew. The battered warp drive sputtered to life, its familiar hum barely audible over the cacophony of alarms. Brian felt the deck plates vibrate beneath his feet as the scout ship's engines strained against the cosmic forces buffeting them. With a bone-jarring lurch, the vessel surged forward. Brian's stomach churned as they plunged into the unknown, riding the faint energy trail like a lifeline. The familiar stars vanished, replaced by swirling vortices of subspace that defied comprehension. Time lost all meaning as they hurtled through this uncharted expanse. Brian's eyes burned from the strain of monitoring their tenuous course, every fiber of his being focused on following that elusive energy signature. Beside him, Janus muttered a continuous stream of Gorn curses, his claws leaving deep gouges in the armrests of his chair. Just as it seemed their daring plan would fail, when the stresses threatened to tear their vessel apart, everything changed. With a final gut-wrenching twist of reality, they burst back into normal space. The sudden absence of turbulence was almost as jarring as the maelstrom they'd left behind. Brian blinked, his eyes struggling to adjust to the comparative darkness of real space. As his vision cleared, he felt his breath catch in his throat. Looming before them, eclipsing entire star systems, was a construct of staggering proportions and impossible geometry. Unlike the chaotic grandeur of the architect's creations, this entity radiated an aura of cold, precise purpose. Vast angular spires stretched into the void, their surfaces an ever-shifting latticework of unfathomable complexity. At its core pulsed a concentrated mass of energy that made Brian's hair stand on end. "What is that thing?" whispered one of the Gorn technicians, her voice trembling with a mixture of awe and primal fear. Before Brian could formulate a response, a series of deep, resonant tones reverberated through the scout ship's hull. The vibrations seemed to bypass his ears entirely, resonating in the very core of his being. It was communication on a level he had never experienced before. "Here's trying to make contact," Janus growled, his reptilian features contorted in concentration. "But these harmonics, they're nothing like what we encountered with the architects." As if responding to Janus's words, the angular construct pulsed with renewed intensity. Its intricate latticework began to shift and reconfigure, each movement a symphony of precision and purpose. Brian found himself transfixed, unable to look away from the cosmic ballet unfolding before him. And then, like a dam breaking, understanding began to flood into Brian's mind. It wasn't words or images, but rather a holistic transmission of concepts and purpose. The construct's very existence was a form of language, each facet and configuration conveying layers of meaning beyond anything human or Gorn had ever conceived. As Brian opened himself to this new form of perception, he began to grasp the barest whispers of the construct's fundamental nature. It was a beacon, a preserver, a living embodiment of the quest for knowledge and understanding that burned at the heart of all sentient life. The realization left him breathless, humbled by the sheer scope of what they had stumbled upon. This was no mere artificial construct or alien outpost. They stood in the presence of something far greater, a cosmic curator of intelligence and discovery, spanning eons and galaxies in its tireless vigil. As this revelation washed over him, the angular construct seemed to respond in kind. Its pulsing core flared with new intensity, unleashing a torrent of information that manifested as shimmering holographic displays throughout the bridge. Schematics for impossible technologies danced before Brian's eyes, exotic matter reactors, warp drives that violated every law of physics he knew, and glimpses of a cosmic design that left him reeling. In that moment, Brian understood that their journey had irrevocably changed. They were no longer mere explorers pushing the boundaries of known space. They had become witnesses to a grand cosmic purpose, torchbearers of a legacy stretching back to the very dawn of consciousness in the universe. As the scout ship drifted amidst the pulsing spires and shifting latticework, Brian felt a profound mixture of exhilaration and trepidation coursing through him. For in this moment, on the precipice of revelations beyond imagining, he knew that the greatest adventure of their lives, and perhaps of all sentient life, was only just beginning. Brian's fingers danced across the holographic displays, his eyes wide as he absorbed the torrent of information flooding his senses. The bridge of the scout ship hummed with an otherworldly energy, every surface alive with pulsing data streams and shifting geometric patterns. "Zix, are you seeing this?" Brian called out, his voice tight with a mixture of awe and disbelief. The Gorn science officer hunched over her console, her claws clicking rapidly as she worked to process the influx of data. "Affirmative, Captain. These schematics, they're beyond anything I've ever encountered. The power requirements alone would dwarf our entire star system's output." As if in response to his words, the holographic displays shifted, coalescing into a vast, intricate web of interconnected nodes and pathways. Brian felt his breath catch in his throat as he began to grasp the true scope of what they were witnessing. "Janus!" he called out, his voice barely above a whisper. I think we're looking at the blueprint of existence itself." The old Gorn warrior lumbered to Brian's side, his reptilian eyes narrowing as he studied the display. "By the ancestors," he rumbled, "you may be right, human. This construct, it's not just a repository of knowledge, it's a guardian, a preserver of the very essence of intelligence and discovery." As Brian and Janus stood transfixed by the cosmic tapestry unfolding before them, a sudden surge of energy pulsed through the ship. The crew stumbled, caught off guard by the unexpected jolt. "Status report!" Brian barked, steadying himself against his console. "No damage detected, Captain," one of the Gorn technicians reported, her scaled fingers flying across her station. "But our systems are changing, reconfiguring themselves somehow." Brian felt a chill run down his spine as he watched the ship's displays flicker and transform, integrating the alien data streams into their own systems. It was as if the angular construct was reaching out, molding their very technology to better interface with its vast stores of knowledge. It's upgrading us," Zix breathed, her voice filled with wonder. "Preparing us to receive its wisdom." As the initial shock wore off, Brian felt a profound shift in his perception. The overwhelming complexity of the construct's design began to crystallize into startling clarity. He found himself grasping concepts that should have been far beyond his comprehension, each revelation building upon the last in a cascading torrent of understanding. "We're not just witnesses," Brian realized, his voice filled with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. "We're becoming part of it, custodians of this cosmic legacy." Janus nodded solemnly, his clawed hand resting on Brian's shoulder. "A great honor," the old warrior rumbled, "and an even greater responsibility." For hours, the crew worked feverishly, their minds stretched to their limits as they grappled with the flood of cosmic revelations. Brian felt as if his very consciousness was expanding, reaching out to touch the vast tapestry of existence that the angular construct had laid bare before them. As the scout ship drifted amidst the pulsing spires and shimmering latticework, Brian couldn't shake the feeling that they stood at the precipice of something truly monumental. They were no longer mere explorers pushing the boundaries of known space. They had become something more, torchbearers of a cosmic legacy that stretched back to the very dawn of consciousness in the universe. The realization left him breathless, humbled by the sheer enormity of what they had stumbled upon. And yet, as he exchanged glances with Janus and the rest of his crew, he saw in their eyes the same mix of exhilaration and tenacity that burned within his own heart. For they all understood that their journey, their ultimate destiny, was only just beginning. The cavernous assembly bay thrummed with energy as Brian stepped onto the raised platform, his eyes scanning the sea of scaled faces before him. Gorn engineers and technicians packed the space, their reptilian gazes fixed on the human who had become an unlikely harbinger of cosmic revolution. "We stand at the precipice of a new era," Brian began, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "The angular construct has gifted us with knowledge beyond imagining, and now it falls to us to wield it responsibly." He gestured to the holographic display behind him, where a complex web of energy signatures and quantum fluctuations danced in mesmerizing patterns. "This is the key to unlocking the fabric of space-time itself. By harnessing the power of our exotic matter reactors and synchronizing them with our new warp drive designs, we can create stable, traversable wormholes." A low murmur rippled through the assembled Gorn, a mixture of awe and skepticism evident in their reactions. Brian pressed on, his fingers manipulating the holographic controls to zoom in on a particular section of the schematics. "Look here," he said, highlighting a series of pulsing nodes. "These quantum field manipulators, when properly calibrated, can create a resonance cascade that tears a temporary rift in the space-time continuum. The exotic matter reactors then stabilize this rift, allowing for safe passage." As Brian spoke, teams of Gorn engineers sprang into action around him. Sparks flew as welding torches ignited, illuminating the angular hull of the prototype vessel taking shape before their eyes. The air filled with the hiss of plasma cutters and the rhythmic clanging of metal on metal as the ship's frame was assembled piece by piece. Janus lumbered up beside Brian, his massive frame dwarfing the human. "You've given us the keys to the cosmos, Brian," the old warrior rumbled. "Now we must prove ourselves worthy of such power." Brian nodded, watching as a team of technicians carefully maneuvered an exotic matter reactor into place within the prototype's core. The device pulsed with an otherworldly glow, its energies barely contained by the reinforced housing. Brian held his breath as the warp drive engaged, its energy output carefully modulated to sync with the exotic matter reactor. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like reality itself being torn asunder, a shimmering portal winked into existence before the assembled crowd. A cheer erupted from the Gorn, their scaled fists pumping the air in triumph. Brian felt a surge of elation coursing through him as he watched the prototype vessel glide smoothly into the wormhole, vanishing in the blink of an eye. Moments later, a transmission crackled to life over the comm system. "This is Captain Zix," came the excited voice of the Gorn pilot. "We've emerged safely on the other side. The wormhole is stable and our position matches the calculated coordinates exactly." As the assembly bay erupted in celebration, Brian turned to Janus, a grin spreading across his face. We did it, old friend. We've taken our first steps into a new age of exploration. Brian's mind raced with possibilities as he gazed out at the prototype vessel re-emerging from the wormhole. The universe had opened its arms to them, offering up secrets beyond imagining, and they, the unlikely alliance of human ingenuity and Gorn purpose, stood ready to embrace their cosmic destiny. The sleek exploration vessel sliced through the shimmering veil of the wormhole, emerging into a star system never before seen by human or Gorn eyes. Brian's hands gripped the control panel, his fingers tightening as he steadied the ship against the turbulent exit. "Stabilizers engaged," he called out, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Zix, what's our status?" The Gorn science officer hunched over her console, her claws dancing across the holographic displays. "All systems nominal, Captain. The new shielding held up perfectly during transit." Brian nodded, allowing himself a small smile of satisfaction. Months of tireless work had paid off. The revolutionary shielding system had performed flawlessly, protecting them from the mind-bending forces of wormhole travel. "Janus, what do you make of this?" Brian asked, gesturing to the view screen. The old warrior lumbered forward, his reptilian eyes narrowing as he studied the alien star system before them. A massive red giant dominated the view, its swollen form casting an eerie crimson glow across a field of debris and half-formed planets. "Our system in its death throes," Janus rumbled, his voice tinged with a mix of awe and reverence, yet still teeming with potential for study. Brian nodded, his mind already racing with possibilities. "Zix, begin full-spectrum analysis. I want to know everything about this system. Gravitational anomalies, radiation levels, any signs of artificial structures." As the Gorn crew sprang into action, Brian couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. The seamless integration of human intuition and Gorn efficiency was a testament to how far they'd come since that fateful encounter with the angular construct. "Captain," called out one of the Gorn technicians, her scaled fingers flying across her console, "I'm detecting an unusual energy signature emanating from the third planet." Brian leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the data streaming across the main view screen. "Can you isolate it?" The technician nodded, her claws clicking rapidly. A moment later, a three-dimensional hologram sprang to life in the center of the bridge, depicting a barren, rocky world. A pulsing red dot marked the location of the energy signature. "It appears to be artificial in nature," Zix reported, her voice filled with excitement, "consistent with some of the technology we gleaned from the angular construct." Brian exchanged a glance with Janus, seeing his own mix of anticipation and caution reflected in the old warrior's eyes. "Looks like we've found our first research site," Brian said, a grin spreading across his face. "Helm, set a course for that planet. Let's see what secrets it's hiding." As the exploration vessel glided towards the mysterious world, Brian felt a familiar thrill of discovery coursing through him. This was why they had come, to push the boundaries of known space, to unravel the cosmic mysteries that lay hidden among the stars. "All hands prepare for planetary approach," Brian called out, his voice carrying across the bridge. "Let's make history, people." The crew responded with a chorus of affirmatives, their movements precise and purposeful, as they readied the ship for its first planetfall in an alien system. As the barren world grew larger in the view screen, Brian couldn't help but feel a sense of profound gratitude for the path that had led him here. From a chance encounter with the Gorn to the mind-bending revelations of the angular construct, every step had prepared them for this moment. And now, as they stood on the threshold of a new frontier, Brian knew that their greatest discoveries still lay ahead. Brian's fingers danced across the control panel, his eyes darting between the swirling chaos of the megastructure and the flickering readouts before him. The bridge hummed with tension as the crew worked feverishly to process the torrent of data flooding their systems. "Zix, what can you make of these energy patterns?" Brian asked, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. The Gorn scientist's claws clicked rapidly over her console. It's like nothing we've ever encountered, Captain. The complexity is staggering. It's as if the very fabric of space-time is being manipulated on a fundamental level. Janus loomed over Brian's shoulder, his reptilian eyes narrowed in concentration. "Look there," he rumbled, pointing a clawed finger at a pulsing node in the holographic display. "That structure. It reminds me of the quantum entanglement matrices we discovered in the Angular Constructs database." Brian nodded, his mind racing to keep up with the implications. "You're right, but this is orders of magnitude more advanced. It's like comparing stone tools to a fusion reactor." A sudden surge of energy rippled through the ship, causing the lights to flicker and consoles to spark. Brian gripped his chair, steadying himself against the unexpected turbulence. "Status report!" he barked, his eyes scanning the bridge for any signs of damage. "No physical damage, Captain," one of the Gorn technicians reported, her scaled fingers flying across her station. "But our systems are changing, reconfiguring themselves somehow." Brian watched in amazement as the ship's displays flickered and transformed, integrating the alien data streams into their own systems. It was as if the megastructure was reaching out, molding their very technology to better interface with its vast stores of knowledge. "It's upgrading us," Izix breathed, her voice filled with wonder, "preparing us to receive its wisdom." As the initial shock wore off, Brian felt a profound shift in his perception. The overwhelming complexity of the megastructure's design began to crystallize into startling clarity. He found himself grasping concepts that should have been far beyond his comprehension, each revelation building upon the last in a cascading torrent of understanding. "We're not just witnesses," Brian realized, his voice filled with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. "We're becoming part of it, custodians of this cosmic legacy." For hours the crew worked feverishly, their minds stretched to their limits as they grappled with the flood of cosmic revelations. Brian felt as if his very consciousness was expanding, reaching out to touch the vast tapestry of existence that the megastructure had laid bare before them. As the exploration vessel drifted amidst the pulsing spires and shimmering latticework, Brian couldn't shake the feeling that they stood at the precipice of something truly monumental. They were no longer mere explorers pushing the boundaries of known space. They had become something more, torchbearers of a cosmic legacy that stretched back to the very dawn of consciousness in the universe. The realization left him breathless, humbled by the sheer enormity of what they had stumbled upon, and yet as he exchanged glances with Janus and the rest of his crew, he saw in their eyes the same mix of exhilaration and tenacity that burned within his own heart. For they all understood that their journey, their ultimate destiny, was only just beginning. The bridge of the exploration vessel pulsed with an otherworldly energy as Brian hunched over his console, his fingers flying across the holographic interface. Sweat beaded on his brow as he worked to fine-tune the harmonic frequencies that linked their ship to the vast quasi-organic megastructure surrounding them. "Zix, I need you to boost power to the exotic matter reactor," Brian called out, his voice tight with concentration. "We're close to establishing a stable resonance, but we need more juice." The Gorn scientist's claws danced across her own console, her reptilian eyes narrowed in focus. "Increasing power output by 15%, she reported. "Be careful, Brian. We're pushing the systems to their limits." A low hum filled the air as the ship's reactor core spooled up, sending vibrations through the deck plating. Brian felt the hair on his arms stand on end as the energy field around them intensified. Suddenly, a brilliant flash of light erupted from the holographic displays, momentarily blinding the bridge crew. As their vision cleared, they found themselves surrounded by a dazzling array of geometric patterns and pulsing energy signatures. "By the ancestors," Janus breathed, his massive frame hunched forward in awe. "It's beautiful." Brian nodded, his eyes wide as he took in the spectacle. The schematics and blueprints flickering before them were unlike anything he had ever seen. Intricate designs for technologies that seemed to defy the very laws of physics. "Look at this," he murmured, gesturing to a particular set of equations. It's a design for a warp drive that doesn't just bend space-time, it weaves through it like a thread through fabric. As the team pored over the cosmic revelations, Brian felt a strange sensation creeping over him. It was as if his mind was expanding, reaching out to touch something vast and incomprehensible. He closed his eyes, letting the harmonic frequencies of the megastructure wash over him. In that moment he saw it, the grand tapestry of existence itself, a cosmic blueprint that stretched from the birth of the universe to its ultimate fate. It was a design of such staggering complexity and beauty that he felt tears welling up in his eyes. "Janus," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "Do you see it?" The old warrior nodded solemnly, his own eyes glistening. "I do, my friend. It's beyond words." For hours the crew worked in near silence, their minds and senses attuned to the megastructure's cosmic language. They decoded schematics for technologies that could reshape worlds, unraveled the secrets of matter and energy, and glimpsed the underlying patterns that governed the very fabric of reality. As the initial wave of revelations began to ebb, Janus straightened up, his voice carrying across the bridge with newfound purpose and gravitas. "My friends," he intoned, drawing the attention of the assembled crew, "we stand at a crossroads of cosmic significance. What we have witnessed here today, it changes everything." Brian nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He looked around at the faces of his crew, human and Gorn alike, and saw in their eyes the same mix of awe and commitment that burned within him. "We've been given a gift," Brian said, his voice steady and clear, "a legacy that spans the breadth of the cosmos. It's up to us now to honor that legacy, to take what we've learned here and use it to push the boundaries of what's possible." Zix stepped forward, her scaled head bobbing in agreement. "We must share this knowledge with our people," she said, "but carefully. The power contained in these schematics, it could reshape civilizations." "Or destroy them if wielded improperly," Janus rumbled, his eyes narrowing. Brian nodded, feeling the enormity of the task ahead. "Then we'll have to be wise," he said. "We'll study these revelations, master them, and then guide our people towards a future worthy of this cosmic legacy." As the crew set to work with renewed vigor, Brian turned his gaze back to the pulsing, ethereal form of the megastructure. He couldn't shake the feeling that they had only scratched the surface of its secrets, that their greatest discoveries still lay ahead. With a deep breath, he plunged back into the cosmic data stream, ready to unravel the next layer of universal mysteries. The journey that had begun with a chance encounter between human and Gorn had now expanded to encompass the very fabric of existence itself. And it was a long way to go. The bridge of the exploration vessel thrummed with tension as Brian leaned over his console, his eyes darting between the pulsing spires of the megastructure and the cascade of data flooding his screens. Sweat beaded on his brow as he fought to make sense of the relentless torrent of information. "Zix, can you isolate that frequency pattern?" Brian called out, his voice strained. The Gorn scientist's claws clicked rapidly across her workstation. "Attempting to filter now, Captain. The sheer volume of data is overwhelming." For days the crew had worked tirelessly, their minds stretched to the breaking point as they grappled with the cosmic revelations pouring forth from the ancient construct. Sleep-deprived and running on stimulants, they pushed themselves to the limit, driven by an insatiable hunger for understanding. It was during one such marathon session that Brian noticed something amiss. His eyes narrowed as he studied a series of readouts, a gnawing unease growing in the pit of his stomach. The old warrior lumbered over, his reptilian eyes scanning the flickering displays. "What am I seeing, Brian?" "These quantum fluctuations," Brian explained, pointing to a series of jagged spikes on the graph. "They're not aligning with the rest of the data. It's almost as if they're working against the harmonic frequencies," Janus finished, his voice a low growl. As if in response to their growing unease, the megastructure pulsed with renewed intensity. The quasi-organic spires twisted and writhed, reconfiguring themselves in a dizzying ballet of cosmic engineering. Suddenly, without warning, brilliant tendrils of energy lanced out from the heart of the construct. They sliced through the void, their searing light momentarily blinding the bridge crew. "Evasive action!" Janus roared, his massive frame hunched over the helm controls. The exploration vessel lurched violently as Janus fought to outmaneuver the grasping tendrils. But it was a losing battle. The energy beams moved with an almost sentient purpose, anticipating their every move. Within moments, the ship was enveloped in a cocoon of pulsing, otherworldly energy. The hull groaned under the strain as exotic particles bombarded its surface. Brian clung to his station, his fist clenched as he fought against the disorienting assault on his senses. His vision swam, reality seeming to warp and twist around him. And then, as suddenly as it began, the onslaught ceased. The bridge fell silent save for the labored breathing of the crew and the faint hum of emergency systems. Before anyone could catch their breath, the air around them shimmered. Holographic displays sprang to life, surrounding them in a dizzying array of schematics and cosmic blueprints. At first glance, the images seemed to be a continuation of the wondrous technologies they had been studying. But as Brian peered closer, his blood ran cold. There, hidden amidst the intricate geometries and pulsing energy signatures, were visions of utter devastation. Entire star systems vanished in the blink of an eye, consumed by an insatiable void. And at the heart of it all, a terrifyingly familiar presence, the Devourer. Its vast tentacled form writhed at the center of the carnage, gorging itself on the very fabric of the cosmos. "By the ancestors," Janus breathed, his voice barely above a whisper. "What have we stumbled upon?" Brian turned to his old friend, his face ashen. "I think we've been played, Janus. This megastructure, it's not what we thought it was." As if in response to their grim realization, the construct pulsed once more. The spires and latticework began to reconfigure, twisting into new and terrifying shapes. "All hands," Brian called out, his voice steady despite the fear gripping his heart. "Prepare for immediate evacuation. We need to get out of here, now." But even as he issued the order, Brian knew it was too late. The megastructure's energy tendrils lashed out once more, converging on their position with lethal intent. There would be no escape this time. No clever maneuver or technological marvel to save them from the cosmic horror they had unwittingly awakened. As the searing energies closed in, Brian exchanged a final solemn glance with Janus. In that moment, a lifetime of friendship and shared adventures passed between them. With a thunderous roar, the exploration vessel's experimental warp drive flared to life. They would not go quietly into the void. If this was to be their end, they would face it head-on, with all the courage and defiance that had carried them across the stars. The ship surged forward, hurtling towards the heart of the megastructure, in a final desperate act of rebellion against the cosmic forces that sought to consume them. As the world erupted into a maelstrom of light and energy, Brian closed his eyes. In his mind's eye he saw the vast tapestry of existence unfurling before him, a grand design that transcended the boundaries of time and space. And though their journey was ending, he knew that their legacy would endure, for they had dared to push beyond the known, to seek out the deepest mysteries of the cosmos. In that final moment, as reality itself seemed to unravel around them, Brian felt a sense of peace wash over him. They had lived, they had explored, and they had left their mark upon the universe. And that, he realized, was all any of them could have ever hoped for. If you finished this story, please subscribe and like the video. Then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.